I'd like to call the meeting to order and start with the salute to the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag. Welcome, everyone. I really want to first start out by saying thank you for adjusting the meeting time. We have RTM tonight, and I think in lieu of the meeting, at least Mr. Blankley and I attended last week with the three committees of the RTM over the municipal improvement. I thought it would be wise if we were done so we could be over there in case any questions came up about the financing of the project or the conditions. So I sincerely appreciate everybody's time shift here. Brings us to routine applications, and for the first two items, I'm going to call on Ms. Tarkington.
So I move routine applications SE3 for selectmen for the amount of $8,053.65, an additional appropriation for the settlement of the Commerce Insurance Company as subrogor of C.H. Gauntlet versus the town of Greenwich.
Okay.
And also SE4 for the first selectman in the amount of $12,840.43, an additional appropriation for a settlement of Utica Insurance Company as subrogor of P. Montes de Oca versus the town of Greenwich.
Thank you very much. Mr. Drake, our clerk.
We have three additional routine applications. IT1, sorry about that. IT1, which is a transfer of $15,538 in the Information Technology Department. HD1, which is approval to use a grant in the amount of $45,377 for the Health Department. And HD2, which is a second approval to use a grant, $65,577, also in the Health Department.
Our routine items so moved. Discussion? All those in favor?
Wait, Mike, I just have a couple of questions.
Soberlander, please.
I have a couple, one is a request to Peter and one is a general question about the Department of Health applications. So, Peter, when we get materials for the BET, it would be, I would very much appreciate it if we got complete materials, not excerpts from letters that appeared for the Department of Health materials, that some of the references were to pages that were not included. There was a reference to a state letter that we only got the first page of, and it would be useful to have all of the documentation that we might need to provide background provided so that when we had questions, we could take a look at the documentation. One of the questions I had when I looked at the Department of Health materials were really having to do with where these employees fit in and what happens to them if we don't get the grant funding for next year, if they don't apply, or if it's not available, or if we don't get approved. And that has less to do with this cycle, but has to do with the next cycle. And I guess one of the questions that came up in discussion on this, and maybe you're able to answer it right now, is if we don't get reapproved for these grants for these employees, are they entitled to any kind of compensation if we get rid of the positions?
I believe the answer would be no. They're just simply laid off because there's no funding in place. And I did see your email, and I'm going to assume that Caroline did not respond. But what I'll do is I will see that all your questions are answered between in the next couple of days.
Thanks, I appreciate it. The question about what happens, next year, I didn't include, is the employees that get laid off, are they entitled to unemployment? So that's a question as well.
They should be. The
Permanent part-timers.
crossing guards, people, rangers at the golf course are all entitled to unemployment compensation. But Jill, I will follow up on all of your questions through Caroline.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Further discussion or questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? 11-0-0. I did fail to mention Mr. Blankley's not with us. He's out of town meeting a family member who's has an illness, so we'll miss Mr. Blakely tonight, but we will try to make it without him with us. That brings us to Assessor's Report. Ms. Tarkington?
Yes, the assessor and assistant assessor aren't with us this evening because of the change in the meeting time. They have to be up at the court in New Britain on, with the judge up there on cases that were previously scheduled for earlier today. Would have made it back for our meeting had it been at the regular time. I
Okay.
think if Jeff and I will, if anyone has any questions, we'll try and respond to them. Otherwise, she'll be with us next month, as usual.
And we do have the Assessor's Report with us.
And of course, the report is in the package, right, that's why I asked if there were any questions on the report to try, but I think it's, they've, again, now working on the next grand list as of October 1st, 2016, so that's upcoming, and that will be the first grand list after the revaluation grand list.
Can I get a motion that the Assessor's Report for, I'm sorry?
I just have one question.
I'm sorry, Ms. Crumick?
I just want to find out if the problem that they had with motor vehicles and the fact that the computer system at the DMV and the state of Connecticut was, as I understand it, messed up so that there were some owners of motor vehicles that were being billed in wrong towns. Has that been resolved?
I think, they really sort of hit it up front. They tried to clean up as much as they could before the bills went out. There were still some remaining, but I think for the most part, they were addressed. Actually, last week, there were BAA hearings, so there were, I think, minimal number of people that, went to that as a way. But I think for, at least for the town of Greenwich, it seems to be pretty much back to normal.
Lauren had said to us in her report to us when we met with her last week, this past week, that by good fortune, that glitch didn't seem to have hit the Greenwich motor vehicle owners as badly as it did some other towns. I don't think we heard from Lauren or anybody else whether or not the state actually had cleaned up that problem. I think the problem still exists at a state level. We've just been lucky that it hasn't hit the Greenwich motor vehicle owners particularly heavily.
I don't think we were lucky. I think we had a department that addressed it head-on
Okay.
and cleaned up a lot of data that, we're very, they went through the lists many times to clean up as much as they could in advance and so forth. So I think that
Right.
Greenwich has a good department that's.
And I think Lauren, in her page one of her report, in the motor vehicles tab there, tried to address it. I guess last Tuesday, the 13th, is the day that we're doing all of those recalculations and additions, cancellations, et cetera, from the tax billing in June from the DME software. So it must be a topic for hers because she's definitely reporting it.
Well, I think that there are separate by, the regulations, separate BAA hearings for automobiles versus the timing of the hearings for real property.
Okay. Can I get a
So I move that we approve the report.
I would second that.
move by Ms. Tarkington, seconded by Mr. Raymer? Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? 11-0-0. Brings us to the Controller's Report. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening,
Roland,
Mr.
and
Chairman,
Elaine.
BET members.
Catherine, I'm sorry I didn't say hello before.
Welcome back from the summer hiatus. Like the BET, the auditors are back today, and they usually take July and August for us to close the books. And they'll be doing their field work, and then we'll be working on the CAFR in October, November. And we'll bring it to the BET and the Audit Committee in November and December for final approvals. Sticking with page one, the operations plans, I put that on there. I've completed my operations plans for the finance department. I should have put in here that the process is annually that I send the operations plan in draft form to Mary Lee Kiernan and Michael Mason. They review it, and then it goes to the full BET with the budgets in either October or November. In prior years, if you've read my operations plan or reviewed it, it was 13 pages or longer. They are now trimming them down, making them more concise because the actual compilation of all the plans was hundreds of pages. And I think there was a number of people who didn't want to read that many pages. So right now, it's between 6 and 7 pages. And again, you'll see it in October, November, after it's reviewed by the Mary Lee and Michael. Going to page, please stop me if you have any questions on any of these topics as I go through. Going to the retirement section on page 4, we, unlike last year with the actuary report, we're way ahead of schedule. We don't have the data backlog we had with Transamerica and the new ADP system. We expect to approve the actuary report for the retirement board in the October meeting. I've got statistics here. They gave us a range that it should be between 22.2 and 23 million. We were slightly over 22 million last year, and basically what's driving it is the 20% of the bad return we smooth over 5 years. The OPEB report is going to be purposely delayed. It could be completed on time, but it's tied into the possible migration to the state plan and the impact on health care. So we're going to hold up on the OPEB plan until we find out how many of the groups are going to the state plan, because it has a direct impact on the OPEB report. And Roland and I sat down in July with the actuary, Greg Stump of Boomershine, and he said that it should reduce the ARC by $1 million plus. Preliminarily, just don't hold them to it, but it's not going to go up, and it'll offset any of the increase in the retirement actuary report. Moving to the cash management section, little house cleaning. There's an error in the cash flow balance, the one on page 4, the 184.8. Kathleen took July to July, and this actually should have been August to August, and the higher number, 16.2, is incorrect. It should be basically 5.7. A year ago, we were at 179,081,000, and it's traditionally higher by 5 to 6 million. It's basically the increase in the property tax collections. There was the CD program on the bottom of page 4 and the top of page 5. Question from a BET member, Ms. Kiernan. Kathleen and I are meeting with Alvarez and Marcel Wednesday. We finally got the CD agreement with the broker settled, and the custodial agreement with TD Bank just flat out fell through, and we're going to look for another custodian, and hopefully we can get that resolved and get this CD laddered program up and running so we can pick up 90,000 or whatever based on our last report. And one housekeeping final, and I'll turn over questions, is actually the reference below the second paragraph in the OPEB portfolio. That was actually the September meeting that all them actions took place, not the August meeting. And I will answer any questions that anybody has on the controller's report.
Mr. Reamer?
Pete, what was the concern of the custodian on the Alvarez and Marcel?
I'm not familiar because it was between their lawyers and our law department. I didn't get involved. There originally was an indemnification clause issue, which we're all aware of. That got resolved, and it's something in the legal language of the agreements between their lawyers and our lawyers. It just never got resolved. If you're interested, I could find the specifics of what held it up.
It's probably not important, Pete. I was just curious if you knew offhand. It just seemed remarkable to me that TD Bank pulled out, and I was wondering why. And it was just because they couldn't get the agreement they were looking for from the town attorney?
That's all it was, simply.
But,
Thank you.
Pete, here it says U.S. Bank, it doesn't say TD Bank.
It is U.S. Bank. I'm sorry, it's not TD Bank. The custodian,
I remember we talked about U.S. Bank
US Bank.
before.
yes, it said U.S. Bank.
Mr. Norton has a motion to accept the controller's report. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second. Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? That motion is carried. That brings us to the treasurer's report. I have a
Second.
motion to move, seconded by Mr. Norton, seconded by Ms. Tarkenton. Discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstaining? 11-0-0. BET Standing Committee Reports. Mr. Norton, Audit Committee.
Mr. Chairman, I have released to everybody the opinion that came from the Office of the First Selectman relating to the Nathaniel Willow Pavilion Apartments. It's a governance issue which the Audit Committee considered as the Governance Committee of the BET. And I think it's very definitive as to who has the responsibility for the 5 apartments in the pavilion. Actually, the request initiated with the chairman of the Nathaniel Willow Board. And we asked the Office of the First Selectman and the town administrator, prepared it for us, gave us a draft at our July meeting, and we accepted it when we met earlier this month.
Thank you very much. Policy and Procedure Committee, Mr. Norton, Mr. Raymer.
Mr. Chairman, we had a proposal to make this evening, but Ms. Cannon has requested or implied, actually, that we should add the same language in another section, which is the first section of our operations and powers section of the manual. And I presume she's referring to the last paragraph under rules of procedure at meetings. Is that correct?
No, Art, I'm looking at page 18 of the policies and procedures. The heading for that section is called Organization and Meetings.
Yeah, that's actually the section, according to mine, that says organization and powers.
And I think the first 2 paragraphs there, one called regular meetings, the other special meetings, would benefit from the same editing that's being proposed on page 2, I believe.
Well, this only applies to special meetings.
Well, there was some language about clarifying what can take place at a regular meeting as part of our discussion and coming out of the Policies and Procedures Committee. So, again, the language that I think Jeff has written and provided captures all of what was discussed and just needs to be set forth any place in the Policies and Procedures that deals with both special meetings and regular meetings.
Okay, so I'm reading the handout here from September 8th, and I see that. Okay. Mr. Raymer?
So perhaps the materials that were distributed could be handled as a first read, and I would propose, if Art is willing, that Art and I will take a look at page 18 of the Organization and Meetings section under the Organization and Powers tab, and propose perhaps some supplemental language there as well.
Okay, I would, this would be something, I'd like, before we get into the real season where we're starting to deal with more agenda items, maybe we can ask all of our members to communicate with Mr. Raymer, Mr. Norton on this, and maybe we can get, I think giving a little oversight on this to the committee, I think we're trying to deal with one issue first and create a policy for when we have these special meetings that pop up. We're trying to stay away from this stuff. We may be able to do that at a later time, but I think they've taken a really good bite at the first go around here. But I'd like to get this, if we can, closed up by October, if we can.
Sure.
On our October meeting.
And Mr. Chairman, I'm not suggesting any new topic or any new content here. This is just repeating the exact same concepts elsewhere because they appear several times within the policies and procedures. You know, in 10 years from now, when only, Ms. Oberlander, Ms. Moriarty, Mr. Lash are left on this board, we want to know what we meant, and so we have to make sure it's everywhere that it should be in the policies and procedures.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be more precise. I mean, what we had done at a policy and procedures meeting, and by the way, Ms. Kiernan was present at that meeting and made some useful observations to us. But at the conclusion of that meeting, we reached a decision of recommending to this board that at special meetings, but not regular meetings, there could be electronic participation and voting. What Ms. Kiernan has pointed out is that on page 18, a separate place, a different page, there's a reference there that 7 members shall constitute a quorum. We had made the change that the quorum requirements would not be satisfied electronically. They would have to be satisfied by a physical presence, and we added those very words, physically present. And so I think what I'm going to do, and again, subject to Art's consent and approval, what I think I'm going to do is just propose some coordinating changes on the page that Ms. Kiernan has pointed out. And if Art's in agreement, that'll be a slightly supplemental report from our committee back to you, which we'll entertain at the October meeting.
Yeah, it seems to me that what we can do is simply use the same language in both places.
I agree. Yeah.
Ms. Weiser?
I had a question for, I guess, Jeff and Art. Did the committee undertake or consider including this electronic participation for regular meetings in the sense, or was it you just basically said this is to a separate, feature or benefit if you were in a special meeting?
We reserved it to special meetings only.
And I don't know if it's appropriate now, but I guess at some point I'd like to understand the rationale for that.
If I may, Art, it's within the province of the body to adopt any rule on this that you want to. Robert's rules and FOIA and our charter all are permissive to have any rule that we might like. So what's coming to you from the Policy and Procedures Committee is just a recommendation, and it doesn't have to be the decision in any way that the BET adopts. It's just a recommendation to you of what was the considered opinion of the two of us, or in the sense of the three of us, since Mary Lee Kiernan was working with us at that time. The recommendation which we're making to you is that this won't affect regular meetings, that regular meetings will not have electronic voting. But at special meetings, because of the character of special meetings, we're making the recommendation that there should be the opportunity for electronic participation for members who couldn't be there because it was a meeting that came up on short schedule, and indeed that members should have the opportunity to be able to vote electronically. That's something that we're applying, a rule that we're recommending that this board apply to its special meetings, but not its regular meetings. And then to make it clear that we're proposing that you not satisfy the quorum requirements out of anybody who's electronically present. We made that explicit in the recommendation by saying on the quorum requirements, we're adding the words physically present. So it will say that 7 members physically present shall constitute a quorum. Now, again, Nancy, just to say it all again, you can have any rule you want. It doesn't have to be the rule that we're recommending to you, but this was the recommendation of this small committee to you.
I agree with it.
This came, Nancy, because I was forced with a meeting of only 7 people, and I didn't think that was an accurate representation of the BET on a special, an item of litigation. I couldn't even put that meeting together. I lost 1 more member. And I think there's some charter language that I look at about where we meet, what a quorum is, and technology. It was very difficult even that day when we did that. I think my goal is if we get something that's a short, one-subject type meeting, we could do that. But for a whole meeting and having quorum requirements, because if you lose the technology connection, and you may lose your quorum, and I didn't want to have that. And I figured this was new and we could take step 1, and if a future BET wants to add to it, we certainly could do that. But we end up having about 1 special meeting a year recently. So I didn't think this was a bigger inconvenience. And by the way, at any regular meeting, if there was an attendance problem, something had come up, the BET as a whole could make a decision that night, as we did when what brought this subject up. So it's sort of a first step.
I mean, I guess as we take it up in October, I would encourage my colleagues on the board to think of extending it to the regular meetings. From my tenure on the Board of Ed, we had that available. I thought one of the benefits of allowing members, admittedly to do it pretty infrequently, is to participate electronically, was the fact that we broaden the pool of people who would be able to serve on the Board of Ed. Many times if people are working, they have commitments at the last minute and they can't attend, but they could participate. So I think, my own personal experience from the Board of Ed was that it was beneficial and it broadened the pool of candidates. We heard in August from Wayne Fox that freedom of information allows it. So something to be discussed in, as we take it up in October, but I would encourage people to consider that in the next month of the benefits to it.
Let me suggest that we will post the time of that meeting. We invite you all to join us.
Yes.
Can I just correct one small misspeak by our chair? It's a kind of a collateral point, but I don't want to foster a misunderstanding. Both Robert's Rules and FOIA are completely clear. And by the way, our charter doesn't prohibit this, that if you have a quorum at the beginning of a meeting, and then one or more members leaves, that you now have less people in the room that constituted your quorum, you still have a quorum to conduct a valid meeting. You don't lose the validity of the meeting by having somebody depart.
Right.
And that's in Robert's Rules, and that's in FOIA as well.
But you couldn't conduct business, you couldn't take a vote.
You could take a vote.
You can take a vote.
So if you had a meeting of 7 people and then 2 left, reducing you down to 5 people, ignoring for the moment that 7 affirmative votes are required to govern an appropriation. If you had a vote on something that was not an appropriation, your 5 remaining people could still vote, and a majority of 3 would still carry the day on that motion, even though you don't have 7 people in the room, and even though your charter said that quorum requirement was 7 people.
Okay, item 7, liaison reports. I have some help on this, but as you know, we're in the middle of arbitration with the teacher contract for the town of Greenwich. This has been a long process. When I stepped out of town, Mr. Lash covered for me, but Ms. Crumick is working overtime. We've had a lot of meetings on this. There's a lot. Obviously, there's a lot relating around the state healthcare, wages, Board of Ed issues and work rules and what have you. Tomorrow's our day. We begin at 10 o'clock for the second day of arbitration. It goes till it ends. So I hope I'm home by Saturday morning. If there's anything you would like to add, Ms. Crumick, or?
No, only to say that you and Al Cava did a terrific job when you were essentially deposed in that arbitration setting.
Saturday, we had a Saturday all-day meeting, and I had to be on the stand at 1 o'clock, and that was the day I said, well, next term, if I'm around here, we delegate this to someone else. No, it was, Shipman Goodwin represents the Board of Ed, and he's a very good coach, and we had a lot of dialogue, and everybody's participating. The Board of Ed has 3 members, Peter Shearer, Jennifer Dayton, and Lauren Rabin, and incredible commitment. A lot of time to get this done, but it's a big contract. It's 900 plus employees, so there's a lot going on there. Liaison. I hope to have a fire and police report for you on the Central Fire Station, and I think Ms. Oberlander and I are trying to do a sort of a tour of police and fire, and I'm hoping as we wait every week, we're getting closer, so we'll have a good idea on the completion of Central Firehouse. Brings me to item number 8, MESA Building Committee, Ms. Tarkington?
Yes,
Moriarty?
we, Leslie Moriarty and I have good news for this board. MESA phases 2 and 3, which are the band, orchestra, and electronic music rooms, which is phase 2, and the chorus room, which is phase 3. These instruction spaces met the scheduled late August completion, and the classrooms and practice rooms were ready for the Greenwich High School music instruction on the first day of the 2016-2017 school year. We got the TCO, and so that's all good news. If everyone thinks that Leslie and I have nothing more to do, we now have to wrap up and close out each one of the 25 trade contracts. 7 are now closed, and also do some additional work in order to get the necessary, leads designation and commissioning, and obviously make sure the paperwork's in for additional state funding. But this is all good news, and it's beautiful space. I know many of you saw it about a month before it was completed, but Leslie especially has done just incredible work making sure that the needs of the teachers and the students were addressed, and they're really, it's most attractive.
Ms. Moriarty? Thank you. If you have anything to add, please do, please do. It came out amazing. I would say that the building committee assignments are not over, because when the building committee's finished, we're going to have a special project team, because as you know, and I think the public needs to know this, and this is really something we need to think about for when guidelines come. Our original agreement with the state of Connecticut was when we had the CO on MISA, that's when we would go back to the state and come up with an agreement on a remediation plan for Hillside Road property. So that is, as I've said for about 4 budgets now, that's the unknown in our budget planning. We had originally talked back before MISA really got under construction that we would divide that project into 4, maybe 5 summers. If I remember when we originally met with AECom, is that accurate, Ms. Kiernan? Sounds right. So we will definitely need to keep up, because that's one of the few capital projects that's sort of the unknown. So I will ask Ms. Moriarty and Ms. Tarkington to kind of be working with, I guess, Amy on that one.
Right, and the work has continued on that project. Substantial testing, et cetera, has continued based on the additional requirements of the state for additional information. So
Thank you
it's
very much.
challenging.
No, thank you. I'd like to step back to item 7 and retirement. The retirement board had been asking for quite some time in the law department to have their own attorney to help them move contracts through, get contracts drafted for some of the changing investments in the investment world. The attorney had brought question to, when the EFT funds came up, about whether the BET had to approve those or not. The attorney for the retirement board had taken about a month after an agreement with Wayne Fox and given an opinion of the town charter, and if the BET has to approve those contracts as just the fact that they were EFTs and not necessarily the particular investment. To make a short story as long as possible, the opinion came from the other attorney. The town attorney turned the opinion around in a little over 2 weeks and gave us a pretty lengthy opinion, which I think we all have seen. Where do I think this puts us? And I think we are going to have to be sort of the influence here. The reason that I had this is because I felt the BET was acting as the fiduciary on all these contracts when they came up. Because we had to approve the contract, it had, and we see more of them, it got past us approving the legal language. It became, we saw debates among our own board about the investment itself and the company and where the investment was. This was a step towards what I will go on record to say is I think the town should go back to a manager of manager, like we used to have right before I got on the BET. I'm not saying I'm hard and firm on that, but I do think that's the next step, because the retirement board has the charge of the responsibility for those investments. And the reason I bring this up, and I think I'm taking Peter's lead, is there's a fee structures that goes with doing that, which we would have to incorporate that. But we have several RTM members, Mr. Dolan's with us today, that this is a real hot topic. And as you heard before in Mr. Menarski's report, it's $20 to $23 million. But I want to encourage all of you. Mr. Drake and I have spoken, and this is top priority for his commitment. But I think this is the way we need to go. And I bring this topic up because to do this, if we're going to make this decision and make it part of the budget presentation or a recommendation to the retirement board that they go this route, because as we know, we've had Mr. Chadwick here and we've argued investments, and that's not my forte, but I don't think it's the BET's forte. I think we have some very knowledgeable financial people and investment people on this board, but the first time we say no to something they wanted, and then it goes astray, it's just a friction. I don't think that's how the system was intended on when it was devised. So I put it out there for your thoughts and opinions, but I really do think that's the way we should be looking to go in the next year with the retirement funds. And I believe we have, Mr. Drake, help me, we have some investments that would have to be carved out of that, which are the
private ones.
Okay, but I just want to go on record now because we have to start, you know, I mean, it's the start of the budget season. We have to start making a step towards, if we're going to make a change, now is where it really should start.
And this is certainly a topic that will be on our next Investment Advisory Committee agenda.
Thank you so much.
And can I
Clifford?
just, a question related to that, is that coming, the idea of going to an outside manager, the initiative from the retirement board, or is it the BET saying this is, I'm not questioning, I just didn't understand
I
from
don't
what
know
you
where the
said.
initiative will come from or how the process will work. I'm giving you my opinion. That's something we need to think about. And as we, in our day-to-day travels, this needs to be a topic. This is the problem we've had, and if you remember, the reason that the town attorney was asked for outside counsel for the retirement board was because of the lengthy process to, help me out, Peter, get contracts through, right? This was the feedback we've been getting for quite some time from the chair of the retirement board. So I think we're at a point now where, because of the recent attorney from the law department, where they believe those contracts all do have to come before us, I think we have to look at the next step. And if it's the retirement board, we can have this conversation with them, or maybe it's an initiative of theirs, but this is something that it's been a rough couple of years with this. And even some of our previous BET members, you know, in talking about retirement board performance, I've never had that to say. My point is, what's the best system for the town and moving forward? Ms. Tarkington?
I just wanted to add to your point that when this is being reviewed, especially looking at the private equity investments and those other types of investments, that we make sure we understand the aspect of these particular agreements that could require interest, return principal, dividends, et cetera, to be again requested for funding. Recalled is the word I use. And also, we actually, on a more recent one, the money didn't even have to be returned to us. They could reuse it. So we, in terms of the liquidity of how we manage these, now getting that data will be very important if you're talking about this. And it'll just be one of those items that will need to be addressed.
But answering Ms. Weissler's question, the last time the town made a big change from that, it came from an initiative from the chair of the BET. So I don't think I'm setting a precedent here. I think I'm following a previous, but those were much different economic times. And Mr. Lash, if you have anything on this, it's.
Not for tonight.
Yeah. So again, just food for thought on that. That's why I wanted to get everybody on that.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Just a question. So the implication is then that the BET is initiating this. So is there going to be some thorough analysis of potential fees and compare that to what we're doing now, and who's doing that?
I think that's the job of our committee,
Okay.
but happy for input from everybody.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Raymer?
Yeah, I mean, the heart and soul of this still comes back to Section 208A of our charter, which, unless it's amended, will continue to say that anytime you want to entrust funds to what it calls a corporation trustee, means an outside entity, not the board itself making its own decisions. Anytime you want to do that, then the selection of the entity has to be approved by the BET.
Absolutely.
And the agreement with that entity, if there is an agreement with that entity, the agreement with that entity has to be approved by the BET and the town attorney. I certainly reacted badly to the notion that the retirement board could hire its own attorney, and if that's an attorney acting in the best interest of the town, that somehow becomes the town attorney. The town attorney is not somebody hired by the retirement board. The town attorney is the town attorney. The wisdom in what's being proposed here, and I think there is a wisdom to it, is that then you could hire a portfolio manager. You could approve him once. You could review and approve his agreement once, but then having approved him and hired him and having approved the agreement, you don't have to bring back to the town attorney and to the BET each and every one of the investment decisions. That's what was wrong with what was going on before. Each of the individual funds that the retirement board wanted to be investing in, each of those became an investment under Section 208A, which required the approval of the BET and the town attorney, and that in fact was taking a very long time, an intolerably long period of time that was destroying the nimbleness of the investment decisions that the retirement board was trying to make.
No, I appreciate that. Okay, moving on. New business. The big calendar. As we did last year, here's a snapshot at what we call the big calendar. This is budget meetings, BET, committee meetings, public hearings. This is a calendar for next year. We typically, oh, Mr. Drake, did you have these for everyone?
Do you have extra copies
I'm sorry, I gave them to,
Here, pass these down.
I gave them to our caucus.
They were not in the
and-
packet, so
No, she did, she gave me a package, but there weren't enough of them, I think. That's what it is.
Can we have one for Beth?
Right, I'll have it sent to everybody tomorrow.
You got one, Beth?
Peter, if you could get more of those sent out to each member, the big calendar, tomorrow, just, I'll escalate. I'll have time in the morning. There are a few changes. What happens is there's two parts to this document. Number one, securing meeting rooms, which is quite a chore. You'll see we have 3 or 4 meetings in the new musical instructional space. Because we couldn't get rooms. Part of it is around budget, the budget itself, when the budget committee's working. Part of it's around holidays. Part of it is trying not to have what happens today where we're meeting after or the same day as the RTM. So there's a lot. Anything you have, just send an email. We'll try to work it out. Last year, I mean, I had some really good help with this, and we did pretty well during the year.
extra copies of this in the first selectman's office?
No, Elaine has them. Elaine has them.
Are they up in finance now, that may, at the end of the meeting, we can?
I don't know the answer to that. She gave me an envelope, but she must not have given me enough unless there was an envelope there for your caucus, which I didn't see. But we'll get more. I'll have them distributed tomorrow.
Thank you.
So again, we hope to adopt that next month. Budget guideline update, Mr. Lash?
So as you know, the first draft of the budget guidelines went out a few weeks ago. The Budget Committee discussed it in some detail. In the run-up to the preparation of that draft, Ms. Kieran and I met with the head of Public Works and the school superintendent. The guideline will get another writing between now and the next meeting of the Budget Committee, and our hope is that then we can adopt that at the Budget Committee meeting with whatever modifications the committee members come up with, and get it to the full BET so it can be adopted in October, so that the department heads and the schools personnel will know what we think the guidelines should be. The current version of the guideline says if you stay with a mill rate increase just a little below last year's mill rate increase, and if you increase the salary component, which is the biggest single item in the budget, by the amount that over time has turned out to be what you need to put in the guideline to match up to the labor contracts which have been approved by the RTM. If you do those things, then you end up with, in this first version of the budget, sort of an $8.5 million shortfall. Now, every week that goes by, we get more information about how last year closed out and what the actuaries are telling us about future requirements for retirement funds and how the departments are actually operating. We're seeing improvement in the numbers over at the Witherell. That a lot of these numbers are in motion, and all of you know because you've been around this process before. What starts out as an $8 million gap usually gets reduced to $1 million or $2 million by the time we're actually getting ready to make final decisions about the budget, and then we make the decisions we have to make in order to get us to where we want to be. This year, based on the May meeting of the RTM, we've asked the departments in the guideline to be very specific about what cost reduction activities, and therefore probably service reduction activities, they would adopt if their budget was approved at a number lower than the number that's reflected in the guidelines now. We'll get to talk about that when we have our meetings in February and March, and then we'll produce whatever we produce, and then the RTM will have its look at it. So we're in a pretty good spot right now in terms of the process. As I said, in another week and a half or so, we'll produce another version of this, which the Budget Committee can then debate at its next meeting. And all of you will have seen that, and you'll be invited, obviously, to make whatever comments you want to make at the Budget Committee meeting so that we can get as much of our thinking about this out of the way before the final version of it is presented to the full BET at its October meeting. So I think there'll be a written revision before the Budget Committee meeting, and I'm hoping not too many, but some additional changes after the Budget Committee meeting, so that when you get something at the meeting in October of the full BET, we'll come into that meeting pretty close to where we want to come out. If we aren't pretty close, it's going to be a long meeting, but we're in pretty good shape right now.
Thank you very, very much. I have seen some of the email traffic and some of the ideas going back and forth, and I think that's fantastic.
And we're absorbing that.
I think that's fantastic. Old business? Minutes, public hearing, March 17th.
I don't know why, but the public hearing minutes of March weren't approved, and so although they're a little stale, they're before you today. You remember, there's the meeting when it's a
Yes.
public hearing, a lot of discussion. So we have 3 sets of minutes here. I'll move them each in succession. If anyone has any comments or modifications, please interrupt me. But we have the public hearing minutes from March 17th of 2016. We have regular meeting minutes from July 6th, and we have the special meeting minutes from August 3rd. I'll move them.
Okay,
I just
Ms.
have,
Oberlin?
I have a couple of typographical edits.
Yes, and you sent them, thank you, that's very helpful.
Okay, so for the rest of the BET, for the regular meeting minutes for the July 6th meeting, on page, what I have is page 4 for the approval of the BET meeting minutes. The motion language should read, upon motion by Mr. Mason, the board voted 12-0-0 to approve the minutes of the June 13th, 2016 regular monthly meeting, so changing 6 to 13. And then on the public hearing minutes, I have a couple of, one question and a couple of name corrections. On the first page, public hearing, the first speaker, Catherine Dew, I wonder whether that was supposed to read she's a Greenwich Academy student and a member of the Safe Rides Committee. On page 2, what's written as Roman Nogay should be Rommel. The N should be an L, and the Nobay, the G should be a B. And Michael Bacino referenced at the bottom of that page, just to correct the district number. And then on page 3, Christopher he's written as Sadis, S-A-D-Y-S, RTM member District 1, should be Sandys, S-A-N-D-Y-S.
Thank you for those. I completely accept them. They're very helpful. Thank you for sending them by email. And you sent them to Catherine, so I'll propose that that those modifications be incorporated. Did you send us, I'm looking here at your email about the public hearing minutes. Did you send those other modifications in another email?
I did, in a
Catherine?
separate
Did you get it?
email. You were copied on both of them, but
Yeah,
there were a
must
couple
have-
of
must
emails
have-
back and forth, so it might have,
No, thank you. It must no longer be on my iPad, but then I would move again the minutes, subject to the modifications that Ms. Oberlander has proposed. Yes, Leslie?
I just also had one other suggested change on the meeting of August, the special meeting on August 3rd.
Yep.
There's some text about the settlement amount and discussion that appears within the period of time of our executive session. And I believe that should be moved to be included in the text after we've exited our executive session. What occurs in the executive session shouldn't be in the minutes. I think the motion to go into executive session should be modified to say to discuss pending litigation, and then it isn't until we come out of executive session that we identify the litigation and then the settlement amounts. So my suggestion is to modify the motion to add the language to discuss pending litigation at the end of the motion to go into executive session, and then the text that describes the actual court case and the discussion of the amounts should be moved to after we have exited the session.
It should be in a paragraph. Leslie, you want to add a paragraph after the motion by Ms. Tarkington and seconded by me to go into executive session. Then you want another paragraph that says whoever made the motion to come out and second it. And then we can have the report of the,
I just want to move that whole text that says executive session and then has two sentences about the recommended settlement. That all should come after the motion to exit.
so you want to add,
I just want to move it down.
Yeah, but you want to add that we came out of executive session when we did.
It's already there, but yes.
The words that say the settled amount is recommended, those two lines could be moved to after the two lines that read upon motion of Mrs. Tarkington and seconded by Mr. Norton. So that you have the motion which exists there to go into executive session. She's proposing there that you say to discuss a case in litigation.
Yeah, you should
and
switch it,
then,
move it up, that's all.
You
That's-
following that?
Yes, so what you're saying is on the bottom of page 2, the sentence that says the settlement amount as recommended by Mr. Fox, et cetera, that goes after the thing that says upon motion by Mrs. Tarkington, seconded by Mr. Norton, the board
Yes.
voted unanimously.
Exactly.
The only other change she's proposing is that when you go into executive session, we normally say to discuss a case in litigation.
Pending.
A pending case in litigation. yes.
Okay. All right, well then thank you, and Leslie's, Ms. Moriarty's provided it in paper, so, yeah, I would recommend that we adopt those modifications.
Well, and then on the next page, you have the gratuitous language, which then should be deleted. The words on the next page say the board then voted 10-2 to approve the settlement. Just a second. Oh, I'm sorry, yes, but that should have been,
Question?
oh, I don't know what, it's probably all right as it is. I don't know what the sequence of events was, so I'm gonna say nothing further.
Mr. Chairman, if I could ask Mr. Minarski, was there a question and was it answered as to where this money has come from? It's coming from the risk fund, is that right, all of it?
I was removed by Attorney Fox, I wasn't here.
Okay.
You talking about after the executive session?
When we approved it, typically we talk about where it comes from.
I was asked to be removed before you went into executive session.
Okay.
I didn't come back, so I don't know what occurred.
Do you
And to the
have
best of
any-
my recollection, we never discussed where the funds are coming from, nor was it presented to us.
The question was asked, but I don't know for the minutes.
Okay. Okay, I guess I'm just asking for our own information, whether you know where it's coming from. It's all coming from the RIS fund.
That question was asked a day or
After.
two later.
I don't ever recall discussing that in.
Okay, so our minutes as amended?
Can I just ask that these minutes be sent out and we do them next month? Because as I go back, it doesn't look like some of the other changes that have been requested have been made.
I have a motion to postpone the minute approval till our next meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
The motion is seconded. Discussion on the motion to postpone the minutes till the next meeting.
Which minutes?
The minutes, the 3 minutes.
August 3rd.
Just one.
Is that-
Okay, just the August 3rd?
Yes.
Okay.
And
Discussion,
and that way we can clarify all this discussion.
okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining. That motion is carried. Brings us back to the 2 minutes for the public hearing on the March 17th and a regular meeting on July 6th. Discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? That motion carries. Thank you. Mr. Drake,
Nothing to add, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Norton?
No, sir, nothing to add.
I have a few things, one I think you're going to find interesting. I want to just share a story. It's one as talking about one of our town service departments. I had a series of computer issues, as you might have seen in the emails, and Ms. Tarkington had the same, and she scheduled an appointment for IT. It was phenomenal. It was great service. It was only a few days later, the one device that I had broken, broke the other device. And I had to go back, and again, as we think of guidelines and we think of operational plans, that was amazing service. I was more than impressed. I'm about 80% for a meeting I'm working on. I just secured a room today with Elaine for a sit-down with the chair of the BET for the RTM district leaders and committee chairs, which you'll all be invited to, obviously. I'm working on an agenda, sort of an update, sort of just a roundtable. I'm going to check in with Mr. Raymer again on how we post that meeting in case we have a certain amount of attendance. I did this not last year, but I did it the year before. And I'm working obviously with Mr. Byrne to get the invite out. So I'm working on that and hopefully we'll see everybody there. And obviously, it'll be the topics of the day, and it's a chance before the guidelines are in, their final draft form, a chance to hear some input and to give sort of an update on some of the things going on. And it should be a lot of fun. I've got a document I'll share with everybody. It's a great learning document that Roland made for me. It goes back to the original CIP list. It's a 1 year, with the first year they did it, and it had incredible amount, it's really an amazing document to look at. It takes a while to really absorb it. I don't know how Roland had that document, though. But it was really good. So with that, you'll hear more about that. I'm just trying to get that firmed up in the next day or so. But that's all I have, other than thank you to everyone, and hope everybody had a good summer, because it sounds like we're going to be busy. Can I get a motion to?
Motion to adjourn. Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you, everyone.